Welcome back to part 3 of this 4-part video series. Today we learn how to properly choose riding modes, as well as how to set up your Race Pro modes for the conditions you will be riding in, whether on the street or on the track. Choosing riding modes may seem daunting, but it's actually broken down for you in the rider's manual, as well as on your TFT dash. Let's take a look at the dash and see what's provided. Using your multi-controller and the rocker button, we are going to access the Race Pro modes. From the Pure Ride screen, we scroll down and across to Settings, Racetrack Configuration, Race Pro Riding Mode Configuration. We will select Race Pro 1, starting with Engine. When we select Engine, we see an associated source of race. The source of race is the same engine characteristic as race in your riding modes, with a provided explanation of optimum throttle response, maximum torque, and off-throttle acoustics active. This will be used when track or road conditions are excellent, DOT race tires or slicks are being utilized, and maximum traction is available. Option 2, we see an associated source of dynamic. Again, this is the same engine characteristics as your riding mode in dynamic, with a provided explanation of optimum throttle response, reduced torque in lower gears, and off-throttle acoustics active. This will be best used when track or road conditions are good, DOT race tires or slicks are being utilized, but traction is down a bit due to cooler road or track temperatures. Option 3, we see soft throttle response, maximum torque, off-throttle acoustics active. This will be best used when roadway conditions are unknown or questionable, damp spots or drying roadways after rain, potential debris, or even when running touring tires. Option 4, we see an associated source of rain with an engine characteristic of gentle throttle response, reduced torque in lower gears, off-throttle acoustics not active. This would be best used when road or track conditions are poor, wet or damp conditions exist, and minimum traction is available. We now see a pattern emerge of the associated source and how it relates to the riding modes. You also have an idea on how to choose which engine source you should use when building your Race Pro modes. Let's take a look at engine brake. When we select engine brake option 1, we see minimum brake effect to the engine, but no associated source such as race, dynamic, road, or rain. This is because there is no associated source to this map for the riding modes. This map provides minimal engine brake support when rolling off the gas. This would be used at the racetrack with DOT race tires or slicks. Riders who use this map for the first time will typically state it feels like they're being pushed into the corner. This is because the engine brake characteristic is not slowing the rear of the bike as much as the rider would like, forcing him or her to utilize more front brake and potentially rear brake. This map is very specific to the racer who likes to utilize the rear brake to enter the corner with little to no engine brake effect. But not to worry, there are other options available to you. Option 2 has a source of race. The source of race is the same engine brake characteristic as race in your riding modes, with a provided explanation of average brake effect of the engine. This would be best used either on the track or street when roadway conditions are excellent, free of debris, water, or wet patches. Option 3 has a source of road with a provided explanation of maximum brake effect of the engine. This is best suited for road rides under all conditions or track conditions that are wet or damp. So with 3 engine brake options provided, why isn't there a map for dynamic and rain? This is because the engineers found that the characteristics of the engine brake map for race were perfectly suited for dynamic, as was road for rain. So the engine brake maps in race and dynamic are identical as are those of road and rain in your riding modes, which brings us to traction control. When we select Traction DTC option 1, we see an associated source of race with a provided explanation of maximum performance. And as we've seen several times now, the associated source is the same dynamic traction control map you will find in your riding modes when selecting race. This would be best used at the racetrack when conditions are excellent and DOT race tires or slicks are being utilized. When option 2 is selected, we see an associated source of dynamic with a provided explanation of high performance. This would be best used when track conditions are good and DOT race tires or slicks are being utilized, but traction is down a bit due to cooler track temperatures, or for the road when conditions are good and DOT race tires are being utilized. When option 3 is selected, we see an associated source of road with a provided explanation of high stability. This would be best used when roadway conditions are unknown or questionable or when running touring tires. It can also be utilized at the track when there are damp patches or when cold, damp conditions exist. When option 4 is selected, we see an associated source of rain with a provided explanation of maximum stability. This would be best used when road or track conditions are poor, wet or damp conditions exist, and minimum traction is available. You now see that all 4 dynamic traction control maps have an associated source to that of your riding modes. The only difference between your riding mode traction control maps and the Race Pro mode traction control maps is your ability to adjust the level of support. Let's take a look at our dash. With Race Pro mode's traction control maps, you have the option to either increase or decrease the amount of traction control support using the DTC rocker button. This gives you a range of +7 to -7. Changes made here have a direct effect in either increasing or decreasing the amount of traction control utilized by the system, to either allow more slip at the rear wheel or less slip at the rear wheel. Using positive values will always provide more traction control support for the rider and negative values less support. Next up, we have Wheelie DTC, and thanks to a 6-axis IMU or yaw rate sensor, Wheelie control has now been separated from dynamic traction control, allowing the engineers to fine-tune the wheelie control in order to carry those low wheelies like the pros when utilizing smooth throttle input. When we select Wheelie DTC, we see option 1, with no provided source and an explanation of high wheelie possible minimal support. This is an excellent choice for the rider or racer who feels he's being slowed down by the Wheelie DTC and prefers to control the wheelie via throttle and/or rear brake. Selecting option 2, we see a source of race, with an explanation of slight wheelie possible optimal propulsion. This is the best option for riders that utilize smooth throttle input on straightaways or corners, as it holds the wheelie just above the ground, skimming the surface, providing optimal drive. Selecting option 3, we see a source of rain, with an explanation of maximum stability. This is a great option for a rider looking for quick wheelie suppression when proceeding straight or exiting a corner. So with 3 Wheelie DTC options and only race and rain coming from riding modes, where are the maps for dynamic and road? Once again, the engineers have compiled the mapping with race, dynamic, and road to all have the same characteristics, with the addition of option 1, which requires the rider to either reduce throttle or utilize the rear brake to prevent or reduce the wheelie. Next up, ABS. When we select ABS, we see option 1 with no provided source. We see that front ABS is minimal, rear is off, distribution to the rear minimal, and anti-rear lift and ABS Pro off. This particular setting is specific to racetrack ABS application, only providing minimal ABS support. Selecting option 2, we see a source of race with front ABS minimal, rear minimal, distribution to the rear minimal, anti-rear lift off, and ABS Pro off. This setting is also specific to the racetrack ABS application, with minimal rear ABS added for additional braking support. Selecting option 3, we see a source of dynamic with front ABS medium, rear ABS medium, anti-rear lift minimum, and ABS Pro minimum. With this option, we see the introduction of anti-rear lift and ABS Pro. Anti-rear lift helps reduce the rear wheel from lifting off the ground under a heavy braking situation. And although this system is extremely effective, it cannot be relied upon under all situations to prevent this from happening. ABS Pro, on the other hand, increases safety for the rider, particularly when braking in corners. If braking is initiated quickly, ABS Pro prevents the front and rear wheels from locking up, reducing the risk of loss of control of the bike, providing the best possible deceleration. This is done by way of the 6-axis IMU or yaw rate sensor, which reads the angle of inclination. Based off the inclination, the system adjusts to offset the braking pressure. Selecting ABS option 4, we see a source of road. The front ABS is maximum, rear maximum, distribution to rear maximum, anti-rear lift medium, ABS Pro medium. This setting is specific to conditions you would find on a typical street ride with road debris, potentially damp or wet conditions when riding through tree-covered corners and emergency braking. Selecting option 5, we see a source of rain, with all supporting values at maximum. This is truly for riding in those rainy or adverse road conditions where safe braking could be compromised at any time. And your last option is to turn the ABS off for the racetrack. This is typically done by racers and track day regulars who prefer the feeling of direct brake lines without an ABS unit. This can be done by removing your license plate and turn signal carrier, turning off your light warnings, and turning off your ABS via the DTC button. You can find a how-to on this by watching episode 2 of our video series, in which the process is broken down step by step, which leads us to dynamic damping control. In the riding modes, you have pre-configured dynamic damping curves that are set by the engineers to provide you with control and stability for the mode you have selected. So which mode do I select for the riding I'll be doing? Let's start with race mode. Race mode is specific to riding on the race track with DOT race tires or slicks. It is an excellent option to start with if you haven't been working with damping characteristics in the race pro modes. The dynamic damping control is stiffer, providing more damping support for the higher speeds, acceleration, and deceleration you'll have on the track. Dynamic mode is specifically for spirited rides on your favorite twisties in which roadways are smooth and dry. The damping is slightly softer than race mode, as this takes into account that roads are generally rougher than the racetrack. Road mode is as it states. It is truly a mode for the road, designed for city streets and highways in which there is potential for potholes and uneven roadway surfaces. This is also an excellent option when running touring tires. Rain mode is a purpose-built for wet or rainy roads, providing a softer damping characteristic that is optimal for the slower speeds you'll be traveling when roadway conditions are poor. Now it's time for my favorite, DDC adjustments in Race Pro modes 1, 2, and 3. Using your multi-controller and rocker button, we are going to access Race Pro modes DDC. The first thing you will notice is the front damping has only one selection available, whereas the rear damping has 2, compression and rebound. The front suspension is adjusted globally, meaning compression and rebound are adjusted simultaneously, giving you 14 stages of pre-configured changes, with 1 being the softest and 14 being the stiffest. The rear suspension also has 14 stages of adjustment, with 1 being the softest and 14 being the stiffest, but they can be adjusted separately. So why is this? This is because DDC uses ride height sensors known as potentiometers to identify where the suspension is in the stroke and the velocity it is traveling at during the movement. The rear shock has a ride height sensor as seen here, but the front does not. In order for the front suspension to have separate compression and rebound, you must install a front potentiometer, which is a racing accessory. This accessory can be purchased through Alpha Racing, the official partner of BMW Motorrad Motorsport. So the next question arises, where do I even start with my settings? Let's take a look at the base settings that are provided. You will see that in Race Pro mode 1, 2, and 3, the DD setting default is +6 for front damping, +6 for rear compression damping, and +6 for rebound damping. This is a great starting point if you have nowhere else to go. It provides moderate support at the front and rear, allowing you to work towards the feeling you are looking for that is specific to the racetrack or road you are setting your bike up. I realize this was a lot of information to take in, but the nice part about it is you can rewind this video that's been provided and take down some notes. Next up, we take what we've learned and apply it to setting up your bike for the road and track. We're going to talk about road sag versus race sag, bike geometry, and how the tires you have chosen affect it. We're also going to meet up with Travis Wyman, who was the first to race the new generation BMW at Motor America, and get his thoughts on the new bike in the season to come. As always, a big thank you to Cross Country BMW. Without you, this video series wouldn't have been possible. And to Irv Seaver BMW for your continued use of the facility. Until we talk again, stay safe out there, guys, and don't forget, make life a ride.